Welcome back to The Outsider Edge. Glad to have you with us as we dig deeper into Dr. Ravier's general theory of coaching and how it reshapes, really, how we think about economics, management, and coaching.
Big topics.
Huge, yeah. And, we're on episode 6 now, and things are about to get interesting.
I think so, yeah.
Especially today, because we're diving into Dr. Ravier's critique of a figure I think a lot of us know and respect, Carl Rogers. Now, before we jump right in, I think we have to kind of address the elephant in the room. Rogers' ideas, and we're talking about client-centered, non-directive approach, have had a massive impact on coaching for good reason.
Absolutely. Huge impact.
I mean, his focus on empathy, genuineness, the client's inner resources, right? That's shaped how we think about therapy, education, business, everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here's where I think it gets spicy. Dr. Ravier suggests there's a fundamental contradiction at the heart of it all. This idea of being non-directive specifically.
Right.
So I'm really curious to hear more about this.
Well, it's a fascinating observation, and in fact, even Rogers himself moved away from using the term non-directive later on.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so maybe he sensed that something wasn't quite adding up between the theory and then what was happening in his sessions. What Dr. Ravier suggests is that when you look closely, Rogers' techniques, they actually reveal a lot of subtle direction, despite this goal of being hands-off.
Wait, so we're saying Rogers, the champion of letting the client lead, was influencing them without realizing it. That's kind of a plot twist.
It is, and I think it challenges a lot of our assumptions about what it means to be non-directive, for sure.
So how does Dr. Ravier back this up? It's a bold claim.
It is, and he has some pretty compelling evidence. He actually analyzed one of Rogers' own session transcripts.
Oh, wow.
And in it, Rogers rephrases what the client's saying, adding judgments and interpretations that the client didn't explicitly state.
Give us an example.
Things like honestly positive or creative. These weren't the client's words, but Rogers kind of adds that layer of meaning.
So it wasn't just mirroring. He was subtly shaping how the client understood their own experience.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes you wonder if Rogers, with all his emphasis on non-directiveness, struggled with this, what does that mean for the rest of us?
It's kind of a scary thought, right? Like if he couldn't escape these subtle influences, how can we be sure we're truly empowering our clients?
And that is the core of Dr. Ravier's critique. He argues that any interpretation, no matter how well-intentioned, is inherently directive.
You're saying even if it feels helpful, it might not be.
Right, because it's like we're handing someone glasses with our own prescription, and that could prevent them from seeing the world through their own unique lens.
It makes sense. We could be subtly steering them toward our conclusions, even if we're trying to be supportive.
Precisely. And Dr. Ravier argues that this might hinder the client's own process of self-discovery.
Okay, so interpretations, even if we're trying to be empathetic, can be tricky. But what about empathy itself? I mean, isn't that essential for good coaching and therapy? Does Dr. Ravier have a problem with empathy too?
Well, he raises some important questions about it.
Like what?
Can we ever truly see the world exactly as our client does? Remember, we all have our own unique filters, experiences, all that.
So you're saying even when we try to put ourselves in our client's shoes, we're still seeing things through our own lens.
Yeah, and that means even our most empathetic responses might unintentionally impose our own perspective.
Wow, okay, so this is really making me think about my own approach. If true non-directiveness is so hard to achieve, even for someone like Rogers, where do we even go from here? How do we actually support our clients without imposing our own biases?
It's a huge question, and thankfully one that Dr. Ravier addresses head-on.
Okay.
He proposes a more refined, you could say, rigorous understanding of non-directiveness, one that tries to minimize these pitfalls of interpretation and subtle influence.
Right, now I'm all ears. What's the secret? Is there a magic formula?
Less about a specific formula, more about a shift in perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Ravier says true non-directiveness lies in focusing on the client's content rather than their meaning.
Hold on, I need you to unpack that one. Content versus meaning.
So imagine a client saying, I feel stuck in my job, not sure what to do next. That's the content. The raw data, the words they're using.
So just what we literally hear them say, no filtering, no interpreting.
Exactly. Now, meaning is where it gets tricky. That's us, the coach, trying to figure out what those words mean.
So we might think, oh, they're unfulfilled, they need a new career.
Exactly. And that's where the risk of influence comes in. We're focused on our interpretation, not the client's actual experience.
So by focusing on the meaning we create, we might miss what they're really trying to tell us.
Exactly. By sticking to the client's content, we create a space for them to explore without our projections, without all our baggage.
Okay, so it's like we're putting down the detective hat, less about solving the mystery, more about being present with what the client is actually sharing.
I like that, yeah. Embracing curiosity, letting their experience unfold without interfering.
But if we're not offering interpretations or guidance, what are we even doing? Are we just passive observers?
Not at all. We might not be imposing meaning, but we're still actively engaged.
How so?
Dr. Ravier's approach is all about reflecting back the client's content. But we're doing it without distorting things with our own filters, you see.
So we're like a mirror, but a really clean one.
Exactly. And by doing that, we empower them to come to their own conclusions, make their own choices. It's fostering real autonomy.
This is really interesting. Simple idea, big implications.
Absolutely. And it aligns perfectly with Rogers' focus on inner resources and self-direction.
But it's like Dr. Ravier is taking it to the next level.
Taking it further, offering a more rigorous framework to actually do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've uncovered this potential pitfall, right? This subtle influence thing, even in approaches that are trying to be non-directive.
It's something we all need to be aware of.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm taking away is it's not about blaming ourselves or saying Rogers was wrong.
No, not at all.
But recognizing the complexity of this.
For sure.
Of really empowering our clients.
Yeah. Big challenge.
And maybe even being okay with not having all the answers. But instead, creating that space where our clients can find their own answers.
Well said.
But before we go too far down that road, I think we need to keep unpacking Dr. Ravier's critique here. What else did he find when he put Rogers under the microscope?
Oh, there's a lot more to uncover. This is where things get even more intriguing.
All right, then let's jump right back in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, Rogers adding those judgments, like honestly positive to his client's statements.
Right, and that illustrates a big point Dr. Ravier makes. Rogers was focused on this implicit meaning, behind what the client was actually saying.
So not just reflecting the words, but also what he thought those words meant.
Exactly, and Dr. Ravier points out even Rogers compared it to the work of a Freudian interpreter.
Wow, that's pretty different from just being a neutral facilitator.
Right, and it makes you wonder, how much was he actually shaping the client's understanding of themselves, even without meaning to?
It's a tough question, and it kind of makes me think, okay, if Rogers struggled with this, where do we go from here? How do we make sure we're not doing the same thing?
Well, that's exactly what Dr. Ravier gets into.
Good, because I need answers. So what does he suggest? How do we get closer to that ideal of being truly non-directive?
Well, remember how we were talking about content versus meaning?
Yeah, remind me.
Okay, so content is just the raw data, what the client is literally saying, no interpretation, just the words themselves.
State the facts of the matter.
And then meaning is what we, the coach, layer onto that. It's our attempt to make sense of it, to add our own understanding.
So that's where the danger lies, right? In that gap between what they say and what we think it means.
Exactly. We start focusing on our interpretation, our meaning, and we might miss what the client is actually experiencing.
So Dr. Ravier is saying, stick to the content, avoid adding our own spin.
It's about creating space for the client to explore their own experience without our projections or assumptions getting in the way.
It's like, okay, I'm hearing you, I'm with you, but I'm not going to tell you what it all means.
That's a great way to put it. It's about embracing that not knowing and letting the client lead the way.
Okay, but if we're not offering interpretations, what's our role? Are we just sitting there silently?
Not at all. We're still active, but in a different way. We're helping them hear themselves more clearly without adding our own noise.
It's starting to make more sense now. It's about supporting their process, not dictating the outcome.
That's the heart of it. We're empowering them to reach their own conclusions, which is ultimately more powerful and sustainable.
I like that, yeah. So it's still about empowering the client, but it's a subtler, more nuanced approach.
And I think it aligns even better with what Rogers was trying to achieve, even if he might not have always been able to fully embody it.
So it's not about throwing out Rogers' ideas, but refining them, taking them to the next level.
Exactly. Building on that foundation and creating something even more effective.
Okay, so this shift from meaning to content, it's pretty big.
It is, and it can be challenging to put into practice.
Yeah, I imagine it takes a lot of discipline to resist that urge to jump in and analyze.
It does, but the payoff is huge. When clients feel truly heard and understood without judgment or interpretation, that's where the magic happens.
I can see that. It creates a level of trust and safety that allows for real growth.
And that's what we'll be exploring more deeply in our next episode.
Ooh, A cliffhanger. But before we go there, can you give us a sneak peek into how this actually looks in practice? What does a content-focused coaching session actually look like?
Well, it involves developing a really keen sense of self-awareness, knowing our own biases, our own tendencies to interpret, so we can catch ourselves and stay focused on the client.
So it's inner work as much as anything.
Absolutely. We'll be diving into specific techniques and examples next time, but for now, just imagine a session where the coach is fully present and resisting the urge to offer solutions or advice.
Sounds almost like a meditation.
In a way, it is. It's about creating that space of deep listening and allowing the client's wisdom to emerge.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. This is definitely making me rethink my whole approach.
I think that's a good thing. It's all about growth and evolution, right?
You know, this whole content over meaning thing has really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It's like I'm looking back on past sessions and thinking, oh, was I imposing my own stuff? It's humbling, honestly. Makes you realize you never stop learning.
Absolutely.
It's pushing us to always be questioning, refining how we understand things.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Even if you're experienced, there's always room to grow.
Right, and to become more ethical in how we practice.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, it's about doing what's best for the client.
And for our listeners, I think that's a really important takeaway. This isn't about trashing Carl Rogers or anything.
No, not at all.
It's more like, okay, he gave us this amazing foundation. Now how do we build on it?
How do we become even better at what we do?
And more aware of the potential pitfalls.
Exactly. And that's what Dr. Ravier is all about. He's challenging us to go deeper, to move beyond the old models.
To create something even more empowering for our clients.
And I think that's what makes this so exciting. We're not just talking theory here.
Right, we're getting into the practical stuff.
How do we actually do this? How do we shift from meaning to content in real life?
Yeah, how do we walk the walk, not just talk the talk?
That's what we'll be digging into in the next episodes. Dr. Ravier has some really specific techniques.
Can't wait. But for our listeners, in the meantime, I think it's worth revisiting some of your own experiences.
Good idea.
Like, think about past sessions. Can you spot those moments where you might added your own interpretation, maybe without even realizing it?
It's a tough exercise, but I think it's super valuable.
It's all about self-awareness, right? Which is what this whole thing is about.
Exactly. So until next time, keep those minds open and keep exploring the outsider edge with us.
And we'll keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in coaching.